Welcome, firefighters. What a whirlwind week, huh? There's a lot happening out there and a lot to celebrate. So let's start with the good news. As we all heard, Democrats clinched control of the Senate, staving off the red wave that wasn't, retaining the ability to confirm federal judges. That's important, and preserving a guardrail to the far-right agenda. Whew, right? Last week, we discussed the midterms with Nebraska Democratic Party Chair Jane Fonda. We talked about how this election proves that climate voters are an organized bloc that politicians do need to pay attention to. And we celebrated some great outcomes for climate that didn't make national news, from county judges to public land commissioners. And check out last week's episode for more on that. Okay. And now, of course, all eyes are on Georgia. Winning in Georgia would give Democrats an extra seat in the Senate, which means that fossil fuel-backed Democrats like Senator Manchin would no longer be able to unilaterally hold the Senate hostage on simple majority votes, which would be very good news for all of us, right? And speaking of Senator Manchin, I also have some not such good news. We recently found out that in the next few weeks, Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer are trying to push through the dirty deal. Remember the dirty deal that we all hands on deck fought against and we beat it? Well, it's back. Their so-called permitting reform bill, which is what it does is it fast tracks oil and gas projects across America, making it easier to get new fossil fuel infrastructure going, just what we don't need, right? And that's why rallying together in Washington, D.C. on December 2nd is even more urgent. We are in a real climate emergency, and we need our politicians to act like it, starting by rejecting this dirty deal once and for all. Let's show them that we can do it again. Just kill it. So join me at Freedom Plaza in D.C. on December 2nd at 11 a.m. Eastern to sound the alarm and make our voices heard together. It's going to be fun. You can RSVP at firedrillfridays.com/events to join in person or by live stream. Okay, now let's turn to our topic for today. Today, we're going to honor Native American Heritage Month by looking back at some of our most wonderful and honored guests on Fire Drill Fridays and hear from Indigenous speakers speak about their experiences and learnings. These are real Indigenous leaders. As environmentalists, it's crucial to honor the peoples that have been and continue to be stewards of American lands for thousands of years. Their leadership is critical in the climate crisis. Indigenous Environmental Network and Oil Change International estimate that Indigenous resistance to fossil fuel projects has stopped billions of tons of carbon pollution each year. Billions. Wow. And they're continually putting their bodies and lives on the line to halt oil and gas pipelines. So brave. Here in the United States and all over the world, this is true. And it's also important to reckon with the colonial history inside our movement, like how conservation efforts forcibly displaced Indigenous peoples from their homes and hunting grounds in order to create national parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone and Grand Canyon. But we don't need to follow in those footsteps, do we? We can practice humility. We can listen and strengthen our movement by following the wisdom and leadership of Indigenous people. Let's take a moment to listen with open minds and open hearts to some of the most powerful voices that have been part of Fire Drill Fridays. First up is one of my favorite guests, Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plans. This is really a profound book, so beautiful, and I really encourage you all to read it, Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin explains in the book and here when she joined us for Fire Drill Friday, how we must change our worldview from one of unbridled exploitation to one of restoration and reciprocal healing. Let's take a look.
We are showered every day with the gifts of Mother Earth: water to drink, food to eat, a breath of sweet morning air, the companionship of maples and meadowlarks. And yet we find ourselves harnessed to an economy that relentlessly asks, what more can we take from the earth? This worldview of unbridled exploitation is, to me, the greatest threat to the life that surrounds us. Isn't the question we need, what does Mother Earth ask of us? Cheryl's song, Chi Miigwech Mashkikia, makes a promise to the plants and to Mother Earth that I intend to keep, and I hope you'll join me. In this time of climate crisis, we can learn from those plants. They know what to do about climate change. They don't dither in ineffectual meetings. They just get to work. Think about it. They have already converted completely to a solar economy. And as we search for new technology to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, we should keep in mind that there is already a system to do that, and it has even more bells and whistles. It generates oxygen, makes music, protects biodiversity, and purifies water all at the same time, and it makes us feel happy and peaceful. It's called a forest. Only 8% of climate spending goes to support natural ecosystems like forests. We need to invest in protecting and regenerating the infrastructure of the natural world. Reforestation, restoration, and land protection should be at the top of our priorities for climate resilience. You know, plants have been removing carbon dioxide from the air since the beginning and storing it in tree trunks and prairie grasses and rich, fertile soil. We should follow their lead and join the movement to keep it in the ground. Plants save the water. Cut down enough forests and the rain will disappear. And as the world heats up, who cools our cities but the trees, doing sophisticated air conditioning without using a single watt of electricity? It is not enough to just protect the remnants that remain. We have to put our hands in the earth and heal the wounds that we have caused. We have to use those gifts of mother love to heal Mother Earth. Restoration is the art of reciprocal healing. Get out the shovels, get out the seeds, get down on our knees, because when we heal the land, we heal ourselves.
When we heal the land, we heal ourselves. Isn't that's so powerful? Next, we turn to my friend, Melina Laboucan-Massimo. Melina is the founder of Sacred Earth Solar and co-creator of Indigenous Climate Action. She is the one that brought me several years ago to the Alberta tar sands. Melina's activism with her community goes back to a blockade when she was only 7 years old. She's an awesome activist. Let's hear her story.
My first blockade was at the age of 7, when my community was blocking a newly built road into our territory that brought with it deforestation and oil and gas extraction. I've seen and experienced massive oil spills across northern Alberta, and namely in 2011, right next to our community's homes, was one of the largest spills in Canada's history. My family couldn't breathe, their eyes were burning, their stomachs were turning, the school needed to be shut down for weeks. This was one of the reasons why I chose to testify before the US Congress in 2012 to let them know about the detrimental impacts of the tar sands and why the KXL pipeline needed to be stopped. In northern Alberta, we see tar sands mines the size of entire cities, and we see the ancient, pristine, beautiful boreal forests, the northern lungs of Mother Earth, being decimated, fragmented, and scraped away for oil, gas, fracking, and tar sands. Never in my lifetime did I think I would witness such devastation to our land, our waters, our medicines, and our peoples. We are not only in an ecological crisis, but we are in a moral human crisis. All around the world, we see people's homes and traditional territories being turned into industrial landscapes. We see people fleeing their homes and becoming refugees because it is no longer safe to stay in their homelands. We see land defenders being murdered for standing up to protect our collective future, and we continue to see women being raped, violated, and abused. These colonial values of domination are embedded in values of patriarchy, and this is why we continue to see the raping and pillaging of Mother Earth, as well as violence against women. The earth is our mother, and violence against the earth begets violence against women. And as a sister and a family member of a murdered or missing Indigenous woman, I can tell you that as Indigenous people, not only are we standing up to protect the land, but we are fighting to protect the women, all at the same time. So myself and other Indigenous leaders spent years building a movement against the tar sands. Our elders signaled the alarm for us, and we followed in their footsteps. We traveled from community to community, country to country, and protested at the AGMs of company after company, and met with countless investment firms and parliamentary officials across Canada, Europe, and the US to say the time is now to divest from fueling the climate change crisis and violating Indigenous rights and destroying our homelands. In 2007, I remember it was such a joke to them of what we were asking. But that didn't deter us. We kept demanding, we kept speaking out. And after nearly 12 years of nonstop campaigning, we are seeing a multitude of oil and gas companies and investment firms pulling out of the tar sands, signaling to the world that it is no longer business as usual in the tar sands. And I think this is an important victory to celebrate as a climate victory, though the fight is not over yet.
Melina isn't the only guest who drew parallels between violence against Mother Earth and violence against women. Climate activist and model Quannah Chasinghorse talked to us about how communities are affected by man camps. These they're temporary housing that's provided to employees of large extraction projects. You know, when they're going to lay down a big pipe like the Enbridge number 3 pipeline in northern Minnesota that we all tried to stop, the man caps come in. And I was there, and you can see the atmosphere in the town begins to change. The bars where people go to get a beer after work start to feel a little more threatening. It's real. So let's see what Quannah has to say about it. It's a real problem. Tell me, you work on missing Indigenous women and girls. Tell me, what is the relationship between that and the oil industry?
So not many people know, but it is very interconnected. The climate crisis, oil and gas industry, and missing and murdered Indigenous women. And some people get confused and don't really understand, but I think it's because people don't even realize that a lot of the places that are that are under attack by the fossil fuel industry is sacred lands to Indigenous people, not just the Arctic Refuge. It's all over, in the Amazon, in Alaska, obviously, in Bears Ears. The big thing is the man camps, which are placed right outside Indigenous communities. And that's why a lot of people are really being affected by, the fossil fuel industry, but not just because of the pollution, but because of the man camps. And it puts more Native women at risk for becoming murdered or missing. And so the rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women surrounding these man camps are sky high. And it's so sad because I personally have been affected by missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it's something that is also very personal to me. So when we talk about the oil and gas industry, we don't just talk about the climate crisis. We talk about the murdered and missing Indigenous women that are still missing, or their cases have gone cold and they deserve justice. And we don't need any more of that kind of thing going on.
Quannah isn't the only guest who's talked to us about man camps. Let's hear from tribal attorney Tara Houska about her experiences. She's up in northern Minnesota with Line 3, still fighting. Listen, Tara, I have also heard with a heavy heart that you know, that the man camps where these thousands of oil workers live in these rural areas, they've just metastasized across Indian country. And, you know, a lot of those workers are decent people, but there are also men in the man camps who rape and traffic Native American women and girls. Would you talk to us about the man camps in your area?
Yeah, I would say you saw the Alberta tar sands and you saw what that looked like and the hurt, the enormous hurt of that. I visited the Alberta tar sands before the pandemic really took hold. And it was the first time that I actually felt so much empathy for these workers because they're doing something so unnatural. They're breathing in toxic fumes every day. They are ripping and rendering and raping the earth. That is an unnatural thing to do as a human being. And so a lot of them are dealing with drug problems, drug addiction problems. They're in and out. They are obviously putting themselves in really dangerous situations. I mean, workers are getting killed and the company doesn't care. They just keep moving forward. And it's a situation in which you're doing something inhuman. And at the same time, I would say that there's also an understanding that they know that our communities where these projects go, because they go somewhere else. They don't go in Hollywood. They don't go in rich suburbs. They go somewhere else. They go in the places that no one sees.
Right?
Sacrifice zones. Where the places that no one sees, the last untouched places, out of sight, out of mind, right? Like that's a big problem with all of society and the way that we operate. But they know that when they're in our communities, we have jurisdictional issues. We can't prosecute them at the same rate as Native offenders. They know that we're basically hands tied when it comes to that. And so the rates of violence and sexual violence and drugs and just criminal activity always goes up when these projects show up in our communities. And it's a really damaging thing for our people, in addition to our living world.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You know, it's not easy to hear about violence and suffering, but it's crucial that we listen to and really understand what's happening. Let's hold all of these testimonials in mind as we revisit ecologist and writer and warrior Winona LaDuke, who laid out the two paths we all must decide between.
You know, a long time ago in Wayne, my father used to talk about a time when you couldn't get food in the store. That's what he used to talk about. Another elder in my community used to talk about the time when water will be more expensive than oil. At the time that they said those things, I didn't really understand what they meant, but we are living in that time. We're living in that time, in that moment. And in our prophecies as Anishinaabe people, this is called the time of the seventh fire. And we're told as Anishinaabe people, we will have a choice between two paths. One path, they say, is well-worn, but it is scorched. The other path, they say, is not well-worn, and it is green. And it is our choice upon which path to embark. And I'm pretty sure that's not just for the Anishinaabe people. I'm pretty sure that's all of us.
So, which path shall we embark on? And will we travel together? Will we stand up to right past wrongs and move forward with respect and solidarity? The need for solidarity with Indigenous people is more acute than ever, as last week, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments about the legality of the Indian Child Welfare Act. This is a 45-year-old law that prioritizes placing Indigenous children in foster care or adoption with relatives, other tribal members, or in other Indigenous homes. The Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted in response to policies that systematically separated Indigenous American and Alaskan Native children from their families and their community, from their culture, from their language. In the 19th and 20th centuries, tens of thousands of Indigenous children were removed from their homes and forced to attend residential boarding schools in an attempt to assimilate them into white American society. They were forbidden from speaking their languages, stripped of their cultures, and made to live in harsh, even deadly circumstances. Later investigations showed that hundreds of children died in these boarding schools. As those boarding schools fell out of favor in the 1950s and 60s, the federal government then partnered with institutions to remove as many as a third of Indigenous children and place them in non-Indigenous families, even when fit and willing relatives were available. To quote Cherokee writer and advocate Rebecca Nagel, quote, "The United States has used generations of Native children as the tip of the spear in attacking tribal sovereignty," unquote. Indigenous civil rights leaders succeeded in getting Congress to pass the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1978 to, quote, "protect the best interests of Indian children and to promote the stability and security of Indian tribes and families," unquote. Dismantling this law would be devastating to Native children and tribal sovereignty. So let's not sit on the sidelines on this one, okay? Let's really get out there and stand in kinship with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Learn more about the Indian Child Welfare Act and what you can do at icwa.narf.org. I'm going to repeat it. icwa.narf.org. Let's also do what we can to set ourselves on the green path that Winona LaDuke mentioned. If you haven't already RSVP'd to the Fire Drill Fridays December 2nd rally, go to firedrillfridays.com/events to let us know you'll join me in person or by live stream to take action for our communities and the planet. Thank you for being part of the Fire Drill Fridays family. See you then. Stay safe.